Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. On behalf of everyone at Rev.io, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, audio will automatically come in through your computer speakers. However, if you're having trouble using your speakers or unhappy with the quality of the sound, you can also dial in via phone using the dial-in number and access code listed on the screen. Second, a recorded version of this webinar will be emailed to you within 2 weeks and available for on-demand access from the Rev.io website. And lastly, we will be having a Q&A session at the end of the event. Please submit your questions via the GoToWebinar control panel at any point during the live presentation. For those of you just joining us, welcome. Today, Dan Cobb and Scott Llewellyn from Inteliquent will be sharing their knowledge about adding new revenue streams with 911 services. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Dan joined the Inteliquent team as Regional Vice President of Sales in September of 2013. He brings over 20 years of experience in sales and business development to Inteliquent. Prior to Inteliquent, Dan was RVP for Windstream, and Dan graduated from Oklahoma State in 1987 and lives with his family in Dallas. Scott joined the Inteliquent team as Solutions Architect in April of 2018. He has been in the 911 industry for 20 years and has spent the last 17 years with West Safety Services as a Senior Systems Administrator, Senior Product Manager, and Systems Architect, managing and deploying core wireless E911 call processing solutions. All right, Dan and Scott, welcome. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. We're very pleased to have an opportunity to discuss our solutions with you today. I'm going to kick things off and talk a little bit about Inteliquent itself and our network and the platform that our 911 services are built upon. Won't take more than, say, 5 or 7 minutes to do so, and then I'll turn it over to Scott so he can continue the discussion. As you can see, we have an agenda. We've already done an introduction. Scott will talk about the current state of the 911 market, 911 trends, growing your existing revenue streams, the various types of 911 services that exist that you can take advantage of, and then how to integrate those emergency services into your product set. A little bit about Inteliquent. Inteliquent is a private, profitable company that's owned by GTCR, a private equity firm out of Chicago. We've been in business for over 13 years. Our operational headquarters is in Chicago, and our executive headquarters is based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I guess when you think of Inteliquent, think of us as a communications platform. I think you hear a little bit in the marketplace about communications platform as a service. That's probably a good description for what we offer. We've made our name in the marketplace with the quality of the services that we offer, and we do that through direct connections to other carrier provider networks. So if you look at this particular slide, the list on the right, we're directly connected with our network to all the top major carriers in each individual segment in the communications provider space. And what that really allows us to do is reach over 800 million telephone numbers directly with our network. That also allows us to carry a tremendous amount of traffic on our network. It varies a little bit month to month, but today we're over 25 billion minutes a month and growing on our network. Let's go to one of the reasons that we're able to provide such high quality on our network is we do provision and maintain our services on 33 switches spread throughout the United States. We try to push those switches close to the geographic edge of the regions that we support. We connect those switches with our own backbone using 100 gig waves as well as other 10 gig and 20 gig waves. You can see on the map here, you'll get a copy of this presentation. But we take great pains to make sure that none of those paths cross in the network. We look at specific KMZ fiber route files to ensure that we maintain the maximum network uptime. Over the last 2 years, our network uptime on our backbone and switching fabric's been 100%. Mentioned this a little bit when I talk about reaching 800 million telephone numbers and serving over 25 billion minutes a month. Scale is important in this business, especially as rates in the marketplace continue to be compressed and certain rates, such as long distance and some others, have almost reaching equilibrium in the marketplace. Having scale is very, very important when you look at what providers you would want to consider using for different services that you'd want to connect to your own platform. Some statistics that really resonate with most of our customers is the fact that over 70% of all the calls we terminate are over direct connections that I mentioned earlier. That means the fastest path of a call is going to go from, for example, our customer subscriber to our network to the far end destination party that they dialed, and then vice versa. If someone's dialing one of our customer subscribers, it's going from the originating caller to our network and then delivered directly to our customer. Really, when you look at Inteliquent and the services that we provide, there's really no call flow path that we can't support. If you look at this slide, it's a good representation of all the different things that a carrier or a VoIP provider, a CLEC, or an API service provider could take advantage of. All the inbound call flows, inbound DID services, inbound 800 services, outbound long distance, outbound international, outbound 800 calls. We also have SMS messaging platform through geographically diverse mirrored intercarrier gateways. We allow third-party messaging of numbers on our network. So we don't restrict our customers just to use our DID numbers to enable messaging. They can bring numbers from other network providers that they use as long as they have an LOA from those providers to do so. Same thing with our 911 services that Scott's going to go into a whole lot more detail on. We don't require just our DID numbers to be enabled. This is a truly number agnostic and network agnostic solution to supply carrier quality 911 services. The other thing I would just mention is we really can support customers at any stage of their life cycle as a company. So if you're a CLEC and you're considering entering new markets, but you don't want to build out facilities to do so, you can host your local numbers on our network, and we bear the cost of the fixed network, and you pay a variable cost per minute. Vice versa, if you're a VoIP provider, you want to own your own numbers with the new FCC requirements, we can also enable that. So if you're transitioning from facilities-based to non-facilities-based, if you want to own more control over your network, you can put all that into a platform like Inteliquent, and we can support that life cycle going forward. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and we can talk specifically about 911 services. Go ahead, Scott.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you're at. Before I dive into the 911 content, I do want to make a quick point about the 911 team that Inteliquent has built. I think it's important in framing this conversation to say a few words about the team. Inteliquent's been actually selling 911 for about a decade now, but in the last year or two, they've decided to make some significant investments in staff and resources to really build up the solution to be a best-in-class public safety grade mission-critical 911 solution. In doing that, they've actually recruited a number of folks from the industry, and if any of you are familiar with the 911 industry, you know it's a niche market, and there isn't a lot of 911 talent just walking around on the streets. Inteliquent's done an amazing job from my perspective in building a team filled with people who have, in some cases, decades of experience in 911 and have lived through some of the critical deployments and changes in the 911 market, like the implementation of wireless phase 1 and phase 2 back in the 90s and 2000s, implementing VoIP 911 solutions. So they've built this great team of experts. And the other piece of the puzzle that I think is very savvy of Inteliquent is to really treat us like our own business unit. So we're unencumbered to a certain extent, or to a large extent, from the daily business operations of the telecom side of the business, which really allows us to focus on bringing a high quality 911 solution to the market and supporting your customers in that way. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I will talk about the current state of 911 just as a brief kind of background for anybody who isn't well versed in 911, and just for a brief overview here. Really, all this started back in the 1970s when wireline 911 came to be. There have been various mandates throughout the last 10 or 20 years that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. In 1994, the FCC released docket 94-102 that basically said that wireless providers have a regulatory obligation to provide a certain level of 911 service for their CMRS end users. So the tier 1, 2, and 3 wireless providers in the United States have an obligation when an end user dials 911 to route that call to the right 911 center. In the 911 industry, we call them public safety answering points. You might hear me use the term PSAP. That's synonymous with a 911 center. And when that call is delivered, when the voice call is delivered to the PSAP, that the phone's location is also delivered and the latitude, longitude of the caller is available at the PSAP. As it turns out, the underlying technology that supports that is, it's expensive and complicated, and the carriers, to a large extent, look to other service providers to provide that solution in a turnkey kind of manner, and it created a whole industry of providers like Inteliquent supporting the OSPs and the CMRS providers. Fast forward to 2005, we have the Nomadic VoIP regulations that some of you are probably familiar with. So for interconnected IP carriers, the Nomadic VoIP solutions require 911 voice capabilities to the PSAPs along with a static and pre-provisioned address. Just a few years ago, we had text to 911, so SMS to 911, whereby somebody texting to 911 actually can have a conversation with a PSAP. So the current solutions are all based on very legacy technology. Wireline solutions are all statically pre-provisioned in location databases. Wireless solutions are currently using relatively antiquated technologies for location determination and call delivery, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The VoIP providers, the VSP call routing solutions are mostly pre-provisioned solutions. So if you turn up a VoIP solution for your customers, the general process is that they have to go onto some website or some portal and pre-provision and log their 911 address, which is a little bit clunky and also introduces errors into the network as people are mistyping information, and it causes a lot of problems. The pre-provisioned VoIP solution is not a very elegant solution. We'll talk about that. I wouldn't say it's not elegant, but it does have problems that future technologies might address. All of these calls are delivered over legacy 911 networks. So there are 911 tandems spread across the country that terminate legacy TDM trunks for delivering calls to the PSAP. These are circuit switched SS7 networks that are expensive to maintain, they're underutilized, and we'll talk more about that, but there's technology that's going to be happening in the future that helps to solve that, and Inteliquent is already leveraging a lot of that technology. So in the future, you can expect to see potentially mandates around mobile VoIP, so over-the-top solutions, VoIP, over-the-top applications on a handset, real-time text, other over-the-top solutions to include things like the Internet of Things and maybe devices that don't even have an end user but are dialing 911 automatically based on a certain set of rules, for example, in a smart city construct. So the market is changing, and in the next 10 or 20 years, I believe we're going to see drastic changes, probably even more impactful than what's happened in the last 20 years with the wireless and the VoIP mandates. So in the future, we're going to have multiple new location technology capabilities. The legacy location calculation methodologies are going to be replaced by real-time or near real-time location capabilities of the handsets, and that's already happening. If some of you follow the news, there's a lot of device-based hybrid location happening on the handsets. There's a common battle cry. A lot of people say, how come I can find the nearest Starbucks or I can hail an Uber, but 911 can't find me? It's tied back to the legacy nature in which location is derived for 911, and there are new technology trends that are addressing that. Another key point is this move from legacy circuit switch networks for call delivery, for voice delivery to the PSAP, to all IP networks. These flat IP networks are going to be easier to maintain, cheaper to install. They'll also be capable of delivering additional information above and beyond what the 911 centers currently receive. So the takeaway here really is that these transitionary periods, as new technologies and communications take place and evolve over time, create a complexity that your customers are going to be faced as they need to meet certain regulatory obligations. And that creates an opportunity in the market for you to better serve your customers and also generate revenue. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the current state of 911 and then the future state of 911. I've touched on this a little bit already, but the current state of 911 voice delivery is that of TDM-based 911 networks. The wireless providers, the VoIP providers, the other providers of 911 services have to build resilient, dedicated 911 connectivity to all of the selective routers. And in order to be fully redundant, they're obviously built in a redundant manner with geographic diversity and sometimes carrier diversity to maintain a highly available solution. The problem is these TDM networks are really costly to build and maintain, and they're vastly underutilized. So you can imagine 2 trunks to every selective router in the country, engineered to handle peak 911 call volume for example, a major disaster or an emergency, but 99% of the time they're sitting mostly idle or idle. The connectivity is also static, and the nature of TDM and the way that the PSAP call handling equipment works, it creates issues with the PSAPs being able to transfer calls and data between themselves. It's very common that one 911 center transfers a call to another 911 center, and data can't be delivered properly because of the nature of these legacy networks. But the future of 911 networks is one of IP-based 911 trunking. So these diverse, dedicated 911 trunks are cheaper to maintain, they're cheaper to build, they can be easily scaled to meet the needs, the traffic needs. They support call transfers and data sharing between the PSAPs much more effectively. It also allows a bigger pipe for PSAPs to receive additional data. The current data interface whereby the PSAPs receive a caller's information is generally limited to the caller's latitude, longitude, and a civic or pre-provisioned address. So 123 Main Street, Boulder, Colorado, with a latitude and longitude. In the future, these IP networks are going to be able to deliver all kinds of video, pictures, floor plans, and other multimedia that will be essential to the PSAPs in giving the caller the help that they need. So one of the challenges and the real takeaway from this part of the slide here is that these evolving networks create complexities in the ecosystem. And the challenge is, for somebody that has the regulatory obligation to deliver 911 to a PSAP, how do you figure out which PSAP has which capabilities? How do you know which selective routers are legacy selective routers or have already migrated to IP-based networks? There's this concept of next-gen 911, and we'll talk about next-generation 911 a little bit in a minute. But as states, jurisdictions, or other regional territories migrate to next-gen 911, to have the logic in the 911 call flow to know which 911 center can handle what data and how the voice and the data should be delivered based on their deployed technology is very challenging. Touching just real quick on the market opportunity, the real crux of this slide is that between 2016 and 2020, 911 revenue opportunities in the marketplace are basically going to double from 300 million to 600 million. And this is just new business here that we're talking about. So I've highlighted the VoIP 911 opportunity because that's the most germane segment of the market for this call. But you can see there are other changes that are happening in the industry with the migration to next-gen 911, which is that migration to all IP networks and call delivery over IP. And other new technologies that will begin to gain traction as well. Voice over Wi-Fi, voice over LTE is already being implemented, text to 911, and eventually real-time text as well. So there's a lot of change happening in the market and a lot of growth and a lot of opportunity for providers to tap into some additional revenue streams. And Inteliquent is building products and solutions to meet the current marketplace as well as also keeping an eye on future needs of the 911 industry and planning on building solutions in the future as well to meet those challenges. So the key takeaways, I think we've touched on a number of these already, but we're in the middle of a long transitionary period from legacy 911 networks to next-gen 911 networks, and that creates a lot of complexity. It's complexity that the customers, in many cases, don't want to take on themselves. It takes expertise, it takes time, it takes money, it creates an opportunity cost, and we'll talk about some of the impacts to carrier customers and their need to meet these mandatory obligations. Wireless communications are becoming ubiquitous. These changes in the industry going from 3G to 4G to 5G, the increase of voice over Wi-Fi, data-only phone calling and mobile VoIP applications is changing the paradigm of 911 technologies. So what we know about 911 now is going to look different 5 and 10 years from now as these new technologies require new solutions for delivering 911 to the PSAPs and possibly new mandates by the FCC as well. And then another big piece of this, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, the predetermined routing, the pre-provisioned address in the VoIP world, the legacy nature in which wireless handsets can have their location calculated in a 911 network are going to be replaced with near real-time solutions that are going to be handset-based, much faster, much more accurate, and that changes the call flows and the implementation of 911 services as well. So the 911 obligations for wireline and nomadic VoIP is clearly, as we've discussed, a challenge and a burden potentially to your customers. There's OpEx costs for the experts to manage these obligations, build the solutions, There's the cost of building the solutions themselves from a CapEx and a NetX perspective. Remember having talked about all of these redundant trunks, underutilized trunks that are built in a very robust manner out to all of the 911 selective routers. That is not an inexpensive undertaking, and it takes a lot of time and energy to maintain those that trunking. They're also, because of the nature of 911 and the fact that they're mission critical public safety grade connections, require additional monitoring, incident resolution, and there's a whole host of FCC reporting requirements around these trunks as well for reporting outages. So all of this really equals opportunity cost for your customers. Keeps them from doing what they do best, which is increasing subscriber base, driving ARPU, building new solutions. So to the extent that you can leverage Inteliquent's emergency service solutions, you can solve these problems for your customers. Also give them an additional solution, an additional product set that you can combine with your products, give them a single point of contact, helps them streamline contractual efforts and single throat to choke, so to speak. Oops, I went one slide too many. So we're going to talk briefly about the two solutions that really fit well in the Nomadic 911 VoIP space that Inteliquent has built. And we've really, I touched on this a little bit about the expertise that Inteliquent has built up on this 911 team, but it was really with the vision that the 911 group would be leveraging Inteliquent's core area of expertise in their market-leading network reach and footprint and the way that they build resilient networks. And that's kind of an underpinning and a foundation of the 911 services and solutions that we've created. It's critical for 911 networks to be highly resilient, and we go to great pains to make sure that all these trunks are geographically diverse, carrier diverse, building out a nationwide network that we can deliver 911 calls that we own, is not outsourced, is key for us. We have this vision of being able to manage the 911 voice from our solution all the way into the selective router or next generation 911 access point. So our 911 gateway is the portion of the solution that actually delivers the voice through the network, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But the 911 gateway with Nomadic location is essentially our VoIP positioning center. Some of you may have heard the term VPC. That's the network element where VoIP addresses are pre-provisioned and where a VoIP service provider would send a 911 call to determine the location based on that pre-provisioned record, locate the caller, route the caller to the right 911 center, and then using 911 gateway actually deliver the call. So there's three main pieces to our 911 gateway with Nomadic solution, with Nomadic location solution, and the first is location management. So we've spent the better part of a decade building APIs and web-based customer portals for supporting our customers on the telecom side of our business. And we've spent a lot of time and energy fine-tuning the portal and the APIs to make them a best-in-class touch point for our customers to be able to manage their business with Inteliquent. We've expanded those capabilities to include the self-management of customers, subscribers, and their locations for pre-provisioning for a VoIP 911 solution. So you or your customers have the ability to log on to the portal or via the API and actually self-manage your subscription, provision addresses, change addresses, delete addresses real time. And those changes take place in the network within seconds. We also maintain all of the PSAP routing logic and manage the location delivery to the PSAP. So when a 911 call is handed to Inteliquent, we find the subscriber's location from the pre-provisioned record, determine the PSAP, understand the PSAP's chosen technology and what they can and can't support from a voice and data delivery perspective, whether they're a legacy PSAP whether they're a next-gen 911 PSAP. And then we actually route the call to the PSAP via our 911 gateway. So we've built a nationwide network of dedicated, fully diverse, highly resilient connectivity to the nation's selective routers and emergency services IP networks, which is the ingress point for next generation 911 systems, all on our own network. So the takeaway, and I want to take a half a step back because it's a really key point to our solution. As a VoIP service provider who launches a nomadic location solution, you really don't have control over where your subscriber turns the service up. They may buy it in one state and send it to their grandma in another state. They may travel with it. They may move. So essentially, even if your network's footprint is small, a nomadic VoIP solution has the capability, the second it's turned up as a service to your customers, to deliver 911 calls to any PSAP in the country. Clearly, a VoIP service provider with a relatively small footprint or even a regional footprint is not going to be building voice delivery trunks to every selective router in the country. It's just cost prohibitive. So we've gone ahead and built that nationwide network of connectivity to the selective routers so that the second a solution is launched and a nomadic VoIP call can be made from any area in the country, and there is a need to deliver that call to any PSAP in the country, the call is simply handed off to Inteliquent and we deliver that call. We also have built support systems based on our telecom business, so the same 24/7 by 365 knock and help desk support that you've experienced in the past has been upgraded with 911 expertise. We have some folks that come from the 911 world and understand the public safety grade, mission critical nature of these types of support questions. And again, I talked about this earlier, dedicated 911 team that's been assembled and carved out and really given the ability to focus on executing and delivering to market the finest 911 products that we can. This is what the solution looks like. So you see the customer on the far left. The Inteliquent solution is basically here what's in orange. And the key part is that the customer is delivering through the portal and API at the bottom and self-managing their subscriptions and their customers and pre-provisioning the address into a nomadic address database. At call time, the customer hands off the 911 call to Inteliquent and everything else is managed from there. The customer has no obligation at that point to route the call, to deliver the call, to broker any of the location updates to the PSAP. Inteliquent's call routing engine queries that address database, determines the routing, the PSAP that the call needs to route to, and delivers it over the 911 gateway to any of the selective routers or IP selective routers or next generation 911 ingress points in the country, depending on the technology need, delivers the call to the PSAP. And then when the PSAP issues a query for the location, we broker all of the location information back to the PSAP and any subsequent rebids that the PSAP may have as well. But the salient point, the key point here is that the 911 call is simply handed off. It's a turnkey solution where all of the location, all of the routing determination, and all of the call delivery is handled within Inteliquent's network with no obligation to the customer. We also offer the 911 gateway separately from the Nomadic solution. And this is what I've already spoke to before. This is a future-proof interface into the public safety networks. So whether a customer's footprint resides in an area with legacy PSAPs, whether the PSAPs are migrating to next-gen 911 actively, or whether they're already a next-generation PSAP, we can deliver the call without the customer having to know what the capability is of the endpoint of the PSAP. By developing this nationwide network and having multiple customers on it, we can pass the savings on to our customers and create operational savings for our customers. So again, instead of having to build a nationwide network of dedicated, underutilized, expensive TDM or IP links to all of the 911 selective routers, the call is handed off to Inteliquent and we use our network for that. I'm harping on this because I've been in the 911 industry 20 years, but obviously all of the connectivity is resilient, fully geographically redundant, carrier diverse. We have special tools and programs that we use to identify the fiber routes that we're building to make sure that there's no single point of failure and that they're highly resilient. Again, insulation from evolving standards. So as these technologies change, our network changes with them, and the carrier simply hands the call off to Inteliquent, and Inteliquent continues to deliver the call. The last point here, there's a lot of customers, carrier customers, that are moving to all IP networks. They're moving from circuit switch to packet switch networks, moving to SIP, eliminating all of their TDM trunks, and this can help with that transition by removing the need for them to build TDM selective router trunking for any 911 solutions. And here's a depiction of the way that service works. Much like the previous diagram, the customer on the right-hand side hands the call off to Inteliquent. And Inteliquent has all of the connectivity to any of the next generation 911 systems, any of the legacy selective routers, and delivers that call to the PSAP. In this solution here, the customer on the right-hand side may have their own 911 location solution. And so in this solution, the PSAPs query through an ALI database or an MPC or the VoIP positioning center, and that's within the customer's purview, whereas the previous solution, the 911 gateway with a Nomadic location, all of the location delivery and brokering the messaging between the PSAPs is fully managed by Inteliquent. Thank you very much for your time. I think, Olivia, throw it back to you for questions and follow-up.
Sounds good. Thank you guys so much. On behalf of the entire Rev.io team, I'd like to thank both of you guys for joining us today for a fantastic presentation. Before we begin the Q&A portion of the presentation, I'd like to remind our audience that you will receive the full webinar recording via email within 2 weeks. In addition, if you've submitted any questions during the presentation that don't get addressed during the live Q&A, we'll be sure to follow up with you via email. Now, Scott and Dan, I'd like to ask a couple questions from the audience. The first question is, can you give a little more detail on your customer portal and how it would be used for 911 service?
Absolutely. This is Scott. I touched on that briefly. Like I said before, we've spent a lot of time and energy incorporating customer feedback into our portal and API services to make sure that the usability and the customer interface and the ease of use is the best that it can be. So one way that a customer would use the portal or API, like I mentioned earlier, is to self-manage their subscriptions to the service. So the customer would use the portal or API to provision their subscribers' addresses, to change the addresses, delete the addresses. Additionally, they can use the portal to change other services that they might have with Inteliquent. So we've made sure that all of the current functionality that a customer enjoys through the portal is retained, and we've added the 911 functionality on top of that so that customers continue to have a single interface for all the services that they may enjoy through Inteliquent.
Great. So for our next question, just progress the slides back. How fast can a new customer be implemented?
For a VoIP 911 solution, the 911 gateway with Nomadic location solution, the implementation timeframe is actually very short, and the majority of the effort is the initial loading of the subscriber records into the location database into Inteliquent's platform. The biggest challenge is that these addresses need to be valid addresses. And so if a customer is launching a new VoIP service and chooses Inteliquent for 911 and has thousands or tens of thousands of records, the initial load of data, there's going to be some error dropout that happens just because of invalid addresses. The customers at the end site, at the portal on the web page, or wherever it is that they self-provision their location through the carrier services, those addresses are not necessarily validated at that point in time, depending on the carrier's implementation of that portal. So we have a large team of data analysts that, upon initial loading of the 911 records, they can go through on behalf of the customer and actually fix all of these addressing errors to make sure that all of the records properly load. And then at that point, because we already have the 911 gateway solution built and all of the connectivity in place, the solution can be turned up relatively quick. So we're talking a matter of days or weeks, depending on how many errors there are in the original address loads. But other than that, it's a very quick and pretty painless process for a customer to turn up new service.
And Olivia, this is Dan. On the voice side, for voice trunks for different call flows, after we get all the required paperwork needed, I mean, it's 5 to 10 business days. Really kind of depends on how fast our customer wants to move.
Okay, that's great to know. Our next question is, can you explain how a customer would be migrated from another provider?
Sure, this is Scott. I can speak to that from a 911 perspective. The biggest challenge with a migration, if a customer already has an existing 911 solution with another provider and is migrating to Inteliquent, there are a couple of key things that we execute to make sure that transition happens seamlessly. The first thing is that the carrier's records are already pre-provisioned in another provider's database. So like I spoke to before, an extract of that data is sent to Inteliquent. We will load the records, look for any error fallout, and correct those. The upside of migrating from an existing provider is that generally those records have already been cleaned. They're generally valid records. So in a migration scenario versus a brand new service scenario, I would expect to see less error fallout and a much quicker implementation from a record perspective. Part of that challenge, though, is while that process is taking place, the customer may choose to dual provision to both sites briefly while the transition is happening. This is to maintain the integrity of the database and the data, to make sure that the exact same data is in the incumbent provider's database as well as the new database at Inteliquent. So if the data transfer and record loading takes 3 days, then the customer would just want to make sure that for those 3 days, any adds, changes, or deletes are properly reflected in both databases. And then the third part of a migration is testing the call delivery. So Inteliquent works with the customer to determine a methodology and delivers test calls either at a selective router basis or all the way down to a PSAP basis to validate call routing and data delivery for the migrated solution, and then launches the service.
Okay, great. So I think we have time for one more question. What separates Inteliquent from other carriers that offer voice services?
I'll take that one. This is Dan Cobb. It's pretty straightforward. It's really our quality. Customers that have migrated services to Inteliquent or use Inteliquent say the difference in quality is noticeable. That shows up in their bottom line in other areas. Fewer trouble tickets means lower customer churn. It also means they spend less on working trouble tickets. Because we support so many and all of a customer's call flows, it actually reduces their vendor management costs, bill reconciliation. I mean, there's all kinds of things there, but really the star is the network and the ability to seamlessly connect to it and use it for all the call flows. I mean, it's the economic value kind of takes care of itself. I mean, through our discussions with our customers, we make sure that that's there. But the reason that we're able to carry that many minutes and grow is because of the network quality.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Scott and Dan, for participating in our webinar. At this point, the webinar is over, and we hope that everybody has a great rest of your week. Thank you.